Hello everyone, welcome once again to Midweek Encouragement. I'm Ronald Rice, your host for the evening. I'm the senior pastor of the Pentecostals of Salt Lake City, Utah. We're at 1755 West North Temple. Come see us sometime, Sundays at 11, Thursdays at 7. Love to have you come join us. Thank you for joining tonight and joining in this journey in seeing Jesus as he is revealed in the Gospels. And always, of course, if you'd like to share the video, please do, or start a watch party. Make sure you're putting some positive emojis and some good comments down below. If you have questions, you can message me one way or another. My email address is pastorrice@msn.com. That's with 2 R's in the middle. So shoot me a note if you need to. I'll be glad to get back with you and start a dialogue if nothing else. If you see anything you disagree with, ask me about it. I would love to learn more. And maybe there's a perspective or something I don't know about, and I would love to know more and more about Jesus. That's the purpose of our studying here tonight and every Wednesday night. We want to learn more and more about Jesus so that we can become a disciple, a better disciple, and draw closer and closer to Jesus. Let's continue from where we left off last time. We left off in Mark chapter 6, and I believe we were getting ready to talk about verse 36. We had gotten to the point where the crowd was there, and we were talking about the difficulties of sending the crowd into the town nearby, and what kind of chaos may have happened if a crowd of 20,000 or more were to be unleashed on a town that typically had 2,000 or 3,000, and it was that's kind of where we stopped. Verse 36 of Mark chapter 6 says that the disciples were wanting to send the crowd away to find food. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. I want to say they cared about the needs of the crowd. It was still early enough in the day that the crowd would have had time to get into town or somewhere in the nearby vicinity to find something to eat. But when they suggested this, what was it that Jesus said? Well, he said, "You give them something to eat." Well, this is how Jesus solves problems. Now, remember that all these disciples are still in training. They're still learning. And it's important to remember that a good leader is proven to be a good leader when he or she leads through a crisis. Well, here we have a crisis. Thousands of people. It's a deserted place. It's mid to late afternoon. They are no doubt hungry, having traveled to where they are now. And Jesus looks at his 12 and says, "You go and feed them." Put yourself in their shoes for a bit. How would you feel in that moment? Can you cook? I know some of you can. I'm Brother Heath. I know you can cook. As long as you got some electricity and an air fryer, you got that made. And many of you ladies out there can cook well. A number of you men, especially if you have a grill outside, you know what you're doing there. But even if you could cook and you had everything, where is there enough food to feed this many people? I mean, is there enough food for a crowd this size? So how much food do we have with us? Do we have enough money to go and buy enough food? What was one of the questions. If enough food could even be found. And they're bringing this to Jesus, and Jesus throws it right back at them. In the Gospel of John, John says that Jesus actually addressed Philip, which is interesting. Jesus asked Philip, where are we going to buy bread enough to feed this many people? Now, I guess a side question might be, why would Jesus pick out Philip and ask him? Well, where was Philip from? Well, John 1 says that Philip was from Bethsaida, which is the region where they were. This is the area of Philip's hometown. Hey, Philip, this is your hometown. You know this area. Where can we get enough food to feed a crowd this size? And that's when Philip says, well, look, even if we had 200 denarii of bread, it wouldn't be enough to feed this crowd. What's 200 denarii? Roughly speaking, that's probably in the neighborhood in today's dollars and 2022 dollars, probably around $30,000. Significant, but have you ever planned a party for a crowd? Like maybe 100 people. I can tell you, if you've got 20,000 people and you've got $30,000, you're talking about, what, $1.50 a person? If you had 100 people, could you do that for $150? I don't think so. Not well. They've got 20,000 people, $1.50 a head to feed them. Remember, they can't go to Taco Bell. They can't run down to McDonald's. They can't go get something off a dollar menu somewhere, right? And they're told that somehow they have to come up with some kind of solution here. And here's the beautiful part. We're going to read on. Mark 6, 38 through 43. Mark 6, 38 through 43. I hope you've got your Bibles there and you can read along with us here. Mark 6, beginning at verse 38. But he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they found out, they said, 5 loaves, 5 and 2 fishes. And then he commanded them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in ranks, in hundreds and 50s. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, gave them to his disciples, and set before them and the 2 fish, and he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fish. So after the disciples are told, hey, go check, see what we got. What they do? Well, they come back, and they come back with 5 loaves of bread and a couple of fish. I remind you again, this is a deserted place, and this is all the food that they've come up with to feed 20,000 plus people or so. We don't know the number. We know the number of men. There's women. There's children. There's a crowd. This is not looking good from a human standpoint. So they bring him 5 loaves and a couple of fish, and Jesus says, all right, you make everybody sit down in the grass. Green grass, that's an interesting bit of detail. We know in the Salt Lake area, grass is not always green. Sometimes it's brown, sometimes it's yellow. Sometimes there's nothing but dirt or sand or clay. So where they are, apparently the grass is green, which is interesting. A grassy area is often a feeding place for sheep. Shepherds lead their flocks to green pastures. So we're still in this interesting analogy to Psalm 23, which I really like. And so green grass, Jesus has them sit down in green grass, and he sits them down in groups of 50s and hundreds. So they're seated, but they're seated in a very orderly fashion and in ranks. And the wording kind of gives us an analogy of groupings of particular crops in a garden. When you plant a garden, you keep each kind of plant together in groups or rows. So they were grouped somehow in 50s and in hundreds by ranks, and then seated in the green grass in their groups. Now, Here the disciples have given 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish to Jesus. Jesus blesses the food. He looks to heaven, he prays, he blesses it. He breaks the loaves and splits all of this among the 12, and then he divides the 2 fish. Fish were probably some kind of dried and salted fish in order to preserve it and keep it fresh and free of any bacteria. So he takes all of this, the bread, the fish, he divides it up, and he divvies it out among the 12. And the 12, I don't know, my vivid imagination takes over sometimes. They kind of look at things, and they look at each other, and they look at what's in their hand, and they kind of shrug and start to hand it out to the people that are gathered and seated in these groups, thinking, I don't have enough for one group, much less everybody here. Somehow 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish fed everyone in that 20,000 plus or so gathering of people. And Mark says that they ate and were filled. They they ate until they didn't want to eat anymore. And the disciples, of course, not wanting to leave anything behind, and we'll find out later they were told to go and gather, but they go back through the groups and they begin to gather up the fragments. Yes, they go through and they pick up all the leftovers. And when they finish picking up all the leftovers, when they finished picking up the fragments, they had 12 baskets full. Fragments full, baskets full of bread fragments and of fish. And this, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, was after all 20,000 plus people had eaten until they couldn't eat anymore. So Jesus took what they had and multiplied it. Well, in the same way, we bring to Jesus what we have, and we allow him to bless it, and consequently, he multiplies what we have. Why? Just hear me here. Why do you think this story is in all of the Gospels? This is perhaps the only story like this in all 4 of the accounts. I contend that it is there because this is a picture of the kingdom. This shows you and me what our job is supposed to be. I know we want to stay in Mark, and I know this is in all 4, but I want to go to John. John 6, same story, but John's account. John 6, verses 5 through 9. And so just for a moment, we're going to get a little more detail. And I want to show you a couple of things here in John. And we'll talk about John's account in a moment. So John 6, I lost my mark. That's all right. John 6, 5 through 9. Let's read it together. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, we've kind of backed up a little bit just to kind of get the context and hear John's account. He said to Philip, where shall we buy bread that these may eat? But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, says to him, excuse me, there is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many? So here's Philip, and he's counting out, being from the area, he's trying to count out just how much it's going to take to give everybody a little bit. And Andrew walks up. You remember Andrew, right? Simon Peter's brother. We see that. By the way, where are Andrew and Simon from? They're from the same place that Philip is from. They're from Bethsaida. So this is home turf for them. They've been here. They know this area. And we see here also that the bread and the fish actually come from a lad or a little boy. So it's the bread that this little boy had. And we find out that it was of the poor people's variety of bread. This was not wheat bread. This was barley bread. Barley bread was what the poor ate because barley was cheap. Wheat cost a bit more. Barley was cheaper. So the poor would typically have barley loaves to save money. So here, it's likely this boy is coming from a poor family. Didn't have much. He had some barley loaves. And some fish. And so all the adults there, the 12 particularly, are perplexed and they're stressed out about what they need to do. And here, a little boy, a child, shows up and offers what he has, which was nothing more than the meal of a poor person would have for whatever it was worth. Just to help. Like, I don't have, this is what I brought. Here, take this. That's only a child could do. It was all he had, but he was willing to give it. He doesn't have much. He doesn't have what it takes to feed everybody. Hear me. The little boy may not have really comprehended all that was going on or all that needed to happen or how much food they really had, which was none. This boy's not mature. He doesn't have experience like the 12 disciples have. Is he naive? Doesn't this boy know that he doesn't really have what it takes? Maybe somebody thought he was too young. And did you see Philip's question? But what are they among so many? What about you? Why are you not more involved in the kingdom than you are right now? Do you feel like you don't have what it takes? Do you think that you don't have the skills or the abilities? Maybe you don't have the opportunities that other people have. Have you excused yourself because you don't think that God can do anything great with you or through you? Listen to me. This story is for you. Jesus does not ask for greatness. He does not expect you to have everything all together. Jesus is not looking for what you have to offer him or the kingdom. He's just looking for someone who is willing. Willing. Because the kingdom is not about how much you have to offer. It's about whether or not you're willing to bring what you have. Jesus can take whatever you have and multiply it. He can take whatever you have and multiply it. He's not even looking for maturity or experience or full comprehension. He's looking for someone who is willing to offer what little they have and simply allow Jesus to bless it, break it. I'll talk about that in a minute. But ultimately multiply it. Jesus can take a little conversation that you might have with somebody and multiply that into something much, much more. I think it's interesting that we don't see Simon Peter saying anything here. We see Andrew stepping up and saying something. We don't see Andrew do very much at all in the Gospels. There's not much about him there. Andrew's not standing up and preaching on the day of Pentecost. Andrew doesn't go to the house of Cornelius and open the doorway for the Gentiles, non-Jews, to become part of the kingdom. What is Andrew known for? He's known for being the man who brought his brother to Jesus. So Andrew is the one who might say something like, well, what I can do is I bring my brother. Who was his brother? Simon Peter. And it was Simon Peter who preached to thousands on the day of Pentecost. It was Simon Peter who enters the house of Cornelius and opened the door for the Gentiles to become disciples. And it was Peter who became a great and well-known apostle for the kingdom. But where would Simon Peter be if it had not been for Andrew? I don't know, maybe fishing for a living, hanging out in Galilee, remaining unknown to history. No, in the scriptures now, Andrew is relatively unknown. And another time we see him, he kind of shows up. It's on Palm Sunday, if you'll remember. There were some Greeks who had come in wanting to see Jesus. And it's Andrew that they approach, and it's Andrew who hears them, and it's Andrew who takes them to Jesus. It's kind of the same old story. Andrew apparently is someone who could bring people to Jesus. He may not have been the most vocal. Maybe he was not as educated or outgoing, but Andrew could find a boy with a willing heart and bring him to Jesus. And Jesus can take that. Jesus can use that. It's in John's account. We see it. It's Philip who says, what are they among so many? But Jesus has found here a willing heart and a little boy who had a little bit to offer. So with that, Jesus tells the 12, all right, everybody, get everybody sit down. Let's get ready to eat. 5 loaves, 2 fish. Poor boys' lunch. And he's just, for one, maybe 2 or 3. I don't know how many he would feed, 4. But what are they among so many? And with that, Jesus says, hey, get everybody to sit down. We're getting ready to eat. I'm telling you, it must have blown fuses in the minds of the 12. They're looking at the bread. They're looking at the fish. They look over at the crowd. They look at Jesus. They look at each other. This is going to be a nightmare. We're in serious trouble here, boys. We're going to seat these people down, and we're going to create expectations in them for a meal, and we don't have anything to give them. But Jesus drastically multiplies more than we can do. Let's continue here in John. It's amazing. Let's read 10 through 13. John 6, 10 through 13. Then Jesus said, make the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. We've talked about that. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, Jesus says to the disciples, gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost. Therefore, for that reason, they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. Let me tell you, Jesus doesn't just multiply what we bring him. Jesus drastically multiplies much more than what we can do. He goes overboard. And if you believe that, you won't be afraid to share with Jesus what little bit that you have. If you will believe that, you won't wait until you have an abundance of money to give tithes and offerings. You'll go ahead and give from what you have right now. I'll tell you the truth. If you can't tithe from $10, you're not going to tithe on $1 million. If you won't share Jesus with a coworker, don't come to me and tell me you want to go to a foreign land somewhere and share Jesus with millions of people who don't know him. Something to think about. Jesus multiplies what is small, what is minuscule. He doesn't need you to be majestic. He already is. He doesn't need me to be impressive. He just needs me to give him what I can, and then he will drastically multiply it. Notice, John gives us a little more information here, stuff that we really don't have in the other Gospels. So we see after everyone has eaten their fill, John tells us that Jesus gave the command. Jesus gave the command, gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost. John doesn't, he uses words carefully, and he doesn't overuse or underuse. And gather here is a key word in the gospel. John's not making a mistake in the use of his words. John's not, if you read John, understand he's not telling a historical account or the biographical account of Jesus. He's not trying to relay just the story of the life and times of Jesus. John, in his writing, is preaching epic sermons. You want evidence? Look at how he opens the book. In the very first chapter of the very first verse of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Boom! There's this dynamic theological statement and understanding right from the beginning of his account. And this is how John is put together. This is how God used him. Now, Mark is great. Don't misunderstand me. Mark is succinct. It's kind of plain, really. It tells a story. Doesn't go into a lot of detail. Doesn't use a lot of explanations. He tells kind of the bare bones of the story, but that's not how John does it. By the time John wrote his account, Matthew, Mark, and Luke were probably already written and in circulation. So maybe John already understands that we don't need another history. What we need now is the message behind the stories. And so John includes stories that the others didn't tell. And he includes details that were in common stories there that the others did not include. I've got to stop there. I don't want to, but I think I better stop there. If I try to go further, I'm going to run out of time, and everything's going to end abruptly, and it's going to be very, very awkward. I don't want to do that. This is a good place to just stop for now, and we'll pick this up next week right where we're leaving off here. I thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for walking this road with me. I appreciate your consistency in being here, whether it's live, whether it's later, it doesn't matter, as long as you're following along. I appreciate that. If you've missed one, you can go back in the archives and get them. All of these are there on YouTube or on Facebook, in the Pentecostals of Salt Lake Facebook page or YouTube channel. So thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here with me. Put some good positive things down below. Share this, talk about it. Let other people know what's going on here that others may also find. We got people watching from all over the world, and I'm thankful for that. So from wherever you are, thank you, thank you, thank you. Share the word, share the message. Let people know about Jesus in your world. In the meanwhile, I invite you to join us again next week, same time, same place, for another midweek encouragement. And until then, and along the way, I want you to love God first and foremost. Love people the way you love yourself. Fast, pray, give to the kingdom generously. And now you go and make a disciple.